curious.
Interested.
The one word I would say is nervous.
I also have the word nervous.
All the words have been used, so I'll use the word optimistic and eager.
I feel anxious.
I will add appreciative.
My parents emigrated to the US from Korea when I was really young. It was for me, this strange bifurcated experience where, at home we were very Korean, right? So I often felt there were two versions of me. There was like the school kind of, external version, and then there was like the Jiyoung at home, right? Who yes, I did play the piano, and I was a dutiful daughter. So just wanted to share a little bit of kind of my experience, but would love to hear from the rest of you.
I grew up in China. I went to Canada for school and then came to the US for work. Growing up in the culture where you really want to be a good student, and kind of the parents are very strict on you, and also traditionally the culture asks you to be a good person, and if something goes wrong, you need to check on yourself.
I was born and raised in the United States. I grew up in Massachusetts. I grew up in a predominantly Caucasian town. And I do think that shaped my own kind of experience of myself and others in pretty significant ways. So I think early on thought I was Caucasian, right? And saw no difference, right, between me and other folks. And I do kind of miss that time. And when I see my kids growing up, like that focus on sameness is pretty amazing. Like they go to any playground and they just start, they like Minecraft too. And that's my connection. But I would say that, at some point, many of us, I think, have a rude awakening, right? And that sameness moves to difference. For me, it was subtle, right? It was kind of like maybe hearing the Chinese-Japanese playground taunt, right, at school and be like, what? What is that about? And so then feeling that not clear which group I belonged in.
I'll share that I also grew up thinking that I was white, and I didn't realize for a long time. And, thinking back on it, there are definitely signs that I wasn't, right? There was definitely taunts at school and comments. And I'm actually a refugee, so I left Vietnam when I was 1. We were a boat people. So we came with nothing here. Very much feeling like I'm a broker between worlds, a bridge between worlds in so many different ways. Because I was the youngest, I was expected to learn English. So I translated everything for lots of folks. Again, my mom didn't know English, didn't know how to read or write in any language. And so she expected me to do well because I saw the struggle she was going through and just not being literate.
Can I ask you a little further about that? Because when you talk about responsibility, I saw a lot of heads nod, similar to the immigrant experience. And so that responsibility, did it feel like a burden to you? And or was it something, it was just part of like the regular fabric of your life and it just was, and you didn't think about it as a burden until maybe you got older or had children yourself or et cetera? Would love to hear about that.
I think it did feel like a burden because I felt it so strongly. I think I had to, translate at the welfare office, and I looked around at my classmates, and none of them, they were out playing soccer, or they were doing all these sports, or they had all these things that I didn't have because we were so poor, right? And they didn't know what my home life was like. So it definitely did feel a burden. I would say I actually didn't really speak at all in school. I was completely quiet until probably like the 6th grade, where I actively made a decision that I needed to start speaking. And so I think there was a lot of trauma growing up that maybe it's actually common in a lot of immigrant experiences. But I didn't recognize it as trauma. I just thought, this is just how life is. And this is what I have to deal with. And other people just don't.
Yeah, so similar to, you, Jiyoung, my family, I was born in Vietnam and my family immigrated here in 1991. So, when I think about some of the earlier memories, it's going to be the struggles, right? So just like any other immigrant, just watching the struggles more so from the angle of being the little one. So I'm the youngest of 4, but I saw my siblings really struggle, coming home and being upset because the principal asked if you know how to flush a toilet after going to the bathroom, or you know, watching my brother and sisters read, you know, dictionaries and literally books after books after books, because you have to work harder than everybody else to even get to the same, you know, level. And because we really had so little, me and my two other sisters, we literally slept in one bed in the living room. And I don't think about, oh, it was so uncomfortable and we were crammed. I think about the scary stories that my sister would make up at night before we go to bed. So, you know, I think for those reasons, I feel like it makes everything mean so much more to me when I think about the accomplishment. I mean, literally, we would save every penny, dime, nickel, and then I'm the designated person, where my dad would drive me to the liquor store to buy Little Debbie's. If you guys remember Little Debbie's, and that was like really a big treat for us. I'd bring that home and we'd split it into 4 pieces for the children. But you know, it really made me appreciate everything I have more than, you know, I can imagine, to where when I think about where I'm at now and where my family's at. But other ways that it's really molded me is essentially not conforming. So maybe it's because I'm also the black sheep in the family, but I don't like conforming. I tend to not want to be the quiet Asian woman. And, you know, there's always this chip on my shoulder to, you know, if someone tells me I can't do something, I'm going to figure out a way to do it.
There were a lot of different reasons that drew me to Waymo, but at the time that I was applying for the role, what was really interesting was I was having lots of conversations with a friend of mine who was wrapping up her postdoc at a university, and she was pursuing a job as an English professor. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the job market for English professors is very small. and so one of the things is my friend has a disability that prevents her from having a driver's license. And it was really striking for me to see how she was not applying for jobs that she was perfectly qualified for because they were not located in cities with great public transportation, or because she wouldn't be able to stay on campus. And so one of the things I thought about was the Waymo Driver has the potential to transform the economic opportunities that are open to someone. And so that was something that just felt really personal and very timely when I was applying for the role. And it felt like it was meant to be.
I'm an IP attorney, and so this technology and this space is super interesting from a cutting edge technology perspective, as well as a law. The law is being developed for this area, so it's super interesting. But I think on a personal note, it was really attractive because this technology really is transformational in so many ways. I also have parents who could not drive. They were elderly at the time. My mom is illiterate, or was illiterate, I guess. They both passed away since. She's never been able to drive. We always had to chauffeur her everywhere she went, and she always had to call us. And there was a lot of dependency on others. And she always wanted to be such an independent person. And before she passed away, we were able actually to give her a ride in the Firefly. And she was so ecstatic and thrilled. And she was like giving hugs to like everybody that was there. She was so excited that it was happening. And I was so grateful to be able to give her that chance to experience that before she passed.
At the time, I wanted something new and something challenging. I don't really have robotics background, so I thought this project looks very challenging and is definitely a new area to me. I can definitely learn some new skills here. So that's kind of one of the motivations that I joined Waymo.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it really goes to making sure you think about what the values are and what the mission you're trying to achieve is. Ultimately, you know, people think about the law in lots of different ways. And I always think, even if there's not a law against it, that doesn't mean you should do it. And even if there's a law that says you can do it, doesn't mean you should, right? And the law is sort of a framework for society to help people interact with each other. But ultimately, in the development of any kind of law, I think about what is the right outcome for everyone, not just for in an individual or society or a subgroup in a society, but for all of people. That's what the law was intended to be. So I think if you start with that baseline, everything else sort of falls into place.
I think for me, our household very much valued being considerate and kind of thinking of others. And that's kind of how we judged ourselves and how we kind of evaluated the world. And I think even though that doesn't match up with, I think, the classical sense of leadership in America, I do think that's been powerful, right? Is that sense of empathy, that sense of consideration. That's not what you think of when you think of amazing product leaders. But I think it's been really helpful, right? Because if you think about product management, it is building connections and kind of bridging disagreements and finding the right intersection between kind of engineering feasibility and product vision.
You know, Jiyoung, for me, I feel like, to be honest, a little guilty. And the reason why I say that is because certainly I've had my moment, right? I've thought about it. I've had my crying session, especially when I think about my parents and how this is going to impact them. And I'm very aware of the news and what's happening, but I feel like I've pushed that to the side at one point. It's like I'm too busy with work, too busy with life. It's almost like a mechanism that I've created to just avoid the impact or realizing what's actually happening, even though I do know. So, you know, I think I certainly feel a little bit of guilt for that reason. Even the word parent makes me cry, right? So like even thinking about how this is going to impact my mom, my dad, I had to help purchase pepper spray for them and then drove over there to Fremont and teach them how to use it. I've emailed them and said, you're not allowed to go on walks anymore around the block. So I don't really want to have to think about that.
Just growing up, I heard from other folks is like, at least within the Chinese culture, there's a saying called eating bitterness, which is sometimes when crappy stuff happens, you kind of just like swallow it and you like let it give you strength and you just like try to plow through it, right? And I think for a while that was a little bit of the approach of like dealing with some of these things. But I think at a certain point where it's not just like me being on the receiving end and needing to eat that bitterness, but it's like affecting a lot of people. Like that's when it's like, all right, that's not okay. Like that, I can do it for myself, but I don't want to see other people like hurt and out of me like eating my own bitterness and not speaking up, right? And so that was definitely a moment for me to say like, no, I need to speak up. I need to like start being more visible around it because it's not just me anymore. It's about the community. So, yeah.
Michael, I totally resonate with that, where I do think that the recent events have really escalated to the point where I think all of us have to grapple with it. Maybe to kind of combine a couple things that folks have said. I think the mix of eating bitterness and that tendency, kind of an approach, and then maybe even looking at kind of the challenges of other groups like BLM, right? I think my approach has always been like how do I be an ally to them because they have it worse, right? And I can deal with the name calling and I can deal with that, right? But I do think that the recent events have kind of escalated to the point where it's like you go murder an old person for walking, like that's just a level of like BS that we have to kind of raise that consciousness.
I want to plus one on the kind of bring awareness to people that Dan just mentioned. Like hearing the events and kind of seeing the headlines, I've been acting as multiple person. One is trying to hide the events from my parents because they are all in China and I don't want them to worry about me. There is not necessarily a life-threatening event happening to myself. But also on the other side, I've also been joining the Stop Asian Hate, those events to kind of bring the awareness to more people.
This is not just a short-term thing right now. This is all about how people understand Asian Americans as the perpetual foreigner. You can be 7 generations in and they'll still think of you as an outsider, right? And how that balances out with the model minority myth, and how so many people think, well, Asians must be doing well, and they sort of pit the different groups potentially against each other. And so a lot of it, I think, is just trying to transform the society we live in and feeling like we're owners in this American fabric, that we have a voice and we have the ability to change things for the better, and actually in line with what America has always intended to be, I think.
That's beautiful. As you were talking, 2 words popped up for me, which is identity, right? Like our identity, how we think about ourselves, and belonging.
What I realized recently was that, like, when there's a dominant culture or a dominant norm, other people in more of that dominant norm or culture aren't needing to do that. And so that extra processing that goes into a meeting or confronting the police or like other life experiences where there's this like, different experience than if you were just living in it and you didn't have to think about it. Like, I realized that not having to think about something, that's privilege.
I've shared this story with a couple of you, but just to share broadly, I recently, like in the last couple of weeks, decided to change my name back to my Korean name. I took on the name Pamela in grade school because I'd shared earlier, the taunts, you're ugly, your name is ugly, no one knowing how to pronounce it. I was thinking back the other day through elementary school, and, I trained my teachers to pronounce my name, but then, oh my God, if God forbid, it was like a substitute came, my last name is Yoon, so it's Y, so I knew it was like right at the end. So I just like wait for her to go through like, the Melissas and the Jacks and the Peters. And then I'd be like, oh my God. And, she or he, the sub would say my name and butcher it, and everybody would laugh. Right. And so I changed it. Not because I hated my name intrinsically, but because I wanted to fit in so badly. You just don't want to stand out in a bad way. And I think as a child, you just want to fit in and you want to belong. And fitting in is actually the opposite of belonging, right? Because true belonging is about, again, bringing who you are to your workplace, to your home, to your community, to your family circles, and just being accepted exactly as you are.
At Waymo, we have our community leadership circle where the ERG leaders come together in conversation. And I remember after my first ERG leader conversation, I pinged Michael and said, Michael, I feel like I have a stake in this company. And that it was just a very powerful moment because we were talking about how we wanted to build culture at Waymo and the role of employee resource groups in building culture. And so it's been personally really valuable to me.
Dan, I'm going to put you on the spot as the executive sponsor. Why were you interested in signing on? I'm sure you have plenty to do, lots going on. What compelled you to help lead this?
I think part of my excitement for supporting Hyphen kind of goes actually a little further back in terms of my own journey. I think a big part of it was, I always feel stupid admitting this, but like kind of learning more about the bamboo ceiling. Because I think for me, there's always this sense that, look, especially in Silicon Valley, like there's many of us in Silicon Valley, right? Like, why aren't we kind of a privileged group? And why would I focus on our group rather than kind of supporting and being an ally to other groups that are more underrepresented? And I think learning about the bamboo ceiling and realizing, wow, like there's such a lack of representation for Asians, especially for Asian females in leadership positions, was a real wake up call for me, right? It was like, actually, our work isn't done here. It isn't kind of, let's just move on to other groups. And I think also getting out of this world of zero-sum game that I can't support and be a good ally at the same time as helping. So I think that was a big part of my journey in terms of being like, yes, how do I support Hyphen? I think also even in our individual experiences. One is around the belonging, but I think a key theme that many of us have touched on is like this sense of censoring or silencing ourselves within corporate America. That like our cultural upbringing just makes that challenging, right? Like that we have this higher bar for everything that we say. And that doesn't fit within the normal context of corporate America. And so to me, those were some of the elements that made me very excited about supporting Michael and Dash.
It's wonderful. Tuyen, Van, and Luann, I would love to hear why Hyphen? Like what drew you to Hyphen?
So Hyphen was having this, I guess, pitching events at Reels too, and there were boba tea. So I went there, I bought a boba tea, and then learned, yeah, we are forming a new ERG group and they are recruiting.
I'm just gonna admit it. Same thing as Leon. I literally showed up because there was boba tea, but the other reason was also because of community.
I missed that email because I love boba, but I didn't attend that boba event. So we have to do it again. I would say for me, it's Waymo is such an interesting place to me. Every company I've worked at, I've been, I've gotten equity, but this is the first place where it feels like you're not an owner just in the company stock, but you're an owner in how the company is going to grow and develop and the culture and its personality and its DNA. And I think this is part of it, right? This is trying to be a company that's not necessarily disruptive, but that's transformative. What I heard recently was transformative with empathy, based on empathy. Hopeful. I think there's a lot of work to be done, but I think that we have a lot of grit.
I feel warm.
I kind of been choosing from relieved and together.
Brave, inclusive, and generous. I also felt like this was such a brave conversation that we had today.
I think my word is connected.
My word would be impressed.
I feel like I'm starting to belong. So I want to just thank everyone for this conversation. Thank you. It's been truly heartwarming and wonderful.